She grabbed my arm so hard I could feel her rings through my flannel shirt, looked me dead in the face, and said, "People like you simply cannot be trusted with anything that matters. You have been a disaster this entire evening, and I want you out of this building right now." Then she turned back to her friends at the bar and laughed, and she didn't look at me again. I was 63 years old. I'd spent 35 years as an electrician, raised my son alone after his mother passed, and driven 8 hours from Columbus to be at my son's rehearsal dinner. And in that moment, standing next to a pile of broken champagne flutes and a spreading puddle of sparkling water on a marble floor, I made a quiet decision. I bent down, picked up the largest pieces of glass, and started cleaning up. Because here's the thing she didn't know. I wasn't part of the catering crew. I wasn't the venue's maintenance staff. I wasn't people like you in any of the ways she meant it. I was the groom's father, and I'd been letting her believe otherwise for the past 45 minutes. Before I go further, if you found this story, please drop a like and stay with me. What happened over the next 2 hours at that rehearsal dinner is something I'm still not entirely sure I believe, and I was there for all of it. My son is 34. He's a software engineer, sharp and steady, the kind of man who reads the fine print and remembers birthdays and always calls when he says he will. I take zero credit for any of that. His mother built those habits into him before she got sick, and after she was gone, he just kept going, the way she'd taught him to. When he called me 2 years ago to say he'd met someone, I could hear it in his voice before he said a word. That particular quiet excitement that means a man has found something he's afraid to jinx by describing too carefully. His fiancée is warm and funny and stubborn in exactly the right ways. I liked her from the minute I met her. She grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, in a house with a name instead of a number, but she never once made me feel like that mattered. Her mother was a different story. The two of them had been together for a year before I ever spoke to her mother. Our one conversation was a video call that kept cutting out, and her mother had a way of speaking to the camera, not to me, to the camera, like she was addressing a recording device she wasn't sure was working, that told me everything I needed to know. She'd decided what I was before we'd met. She just hadn't had the opportunity to say it out loud yet. Her father was harder to read, quiet, measured, clearly smart. He'd built a technology company in the 90s, sold it, and married into a Connecticut family with old money and older furniture. He'd spent 25 years being the quieter half of that partnership. I didn't know yet what that meant. The rehearsal dinner was at a private club outside of Greenwich. Stone building, oil paintings, the kind of place that smells like old money and lemon polish. My son and I had driven up from the hotel together, but he got a call that his best friend's flight had been delayed, and he needed to arrange an alternate pickup. He asked if I could head over early and let the family know he'd be a few minutes behind. I parked, grabbed my suit bag from the back seat, and walked toward the entrance. I was wearing khakis and a red flannel shirt I'd planned to change in the club's men's room before guests arrived. I never made it to the men's room. A woman with a clipboard intercepted me at the side entrance. Could I help carry boxes from the delivery van? One of the setup crew hadn't shown. I said sure, figuring I had 40 minutes and it was only boxes. I carried in 4 crates of rental linens. Someone handed me a lanyard with the word staff printed on it. I clipped it to my shirt pocket without thinking, carried 2 more crates, set out some chairs. Her mother arrived while I was straightening a centerpiece that had been knocked crooked. She walked past me without stopping. Is this really how they're setting these tables? The roses should be lower. Fix it. She kept walking. I fixed the roses. I was about to go find her and explain who I was when I heard her voice from the next room, low and sharp, talking to a woman in a green dress who nodded at everything like a bobblehead set in front of a fan. I've given them 2 years, her mother said. 2 years of smiling at dinners and pretending I don't see what she's throwing her life away on. Tonight, I'm done pretending." I stopped walking. "You're really going through with it?" her friend said. I had someone looking into him for 3 months. He ran a small business when he was 26, failed completely, $40,000 in debt. I have the documents. She paused. I'm going to bring it up during my toast. Frame it as a story about responsibility, about what it takes to build a real life together. Anyone with half a brain will understand what I'm actually saying. And if Roger doesn't know, and Roger does what I tell him. He always has. She said it the way you might describe a reliable appliance, without malice, almost, just certainty. I stood very still. She had a private investigator's report. She had a speech planned. She was going to embarrass my son in front of his fiancé's entire family, frame it as a question of character, and do it at his own rehearsal dinner. And she'd had this planned for weeks. I looked down at the staff lanyard on my chest, and I decided to stay. If you're new here, please subscribe. It takes 2 seconds, and it genuinely helps me keep making content for you. Now let me tell you what happened next. I spent the next 40 minutes being the most useful staff member that room had ever seen. I refilled water glasses. I adjusted the lighting twice when she complained it was too yellow. I carried a folding table from the storage room to the corridor, and every time I was near her, I listened. Her plan was worse than I'd first understood. She'd also coordinated with her nephew, her sister's son, early 30s, the kind of handsome that comes from never having worried about anything in his life, to be seated next to my son's fiancée at dinner. He was supposed to be charming, attentive, an implicit suggestion. Look at what you could have chosen instead. Her mother had actually redesigned the seating chart around this. And she had called the bakery, the small place in Westport, that my son and his fiancée had chosen together after visiting 6 different shops on a Saturday afternoon, and given them a wrong delivery address for the wedding morning. To make things chaotic, to make my son look disorganized and unreliable on the most important day of his life. That last one was when I pulled out my phone and texted my son. "Don't come in yet. I need 10 more minutes. There's something you need to know." He called immediately, and I stepped into the coat closet and told him everything I'd heard in the flat, quiet voice I used when he was small, and something genuinely hard needed explaining. He was silent for a long moment. "Dad, are you actually pretending to be part of the waitstaff right now?" "Yes." I don't know whether to be horrified or. "Call the bakery first, fix the delivery address, then come in." "Dad, trust me." He was quiet again, then 10 minutes. I went back to work. Her nephew arrived at 20 minutes to 7, handsome, in a navy blazer, and made his way directly to my son's fiancée with the particular confidence of a man who's been told by his aunt that his presence is itself a gift. She was standing near the fireplace with 2 of her college friends, and she smiled politely when he introduced himself, the way you smile at someone you don't recognize, but are willing to be kind to. Within 5 minutes, he had his hand on her shoulder. Within 6, she had stepped slightly to the left and angled her body away. Within 7, I had maneuvered a tray of canapés between them and offered one to each of them with cheerful, impartial professionalism. He glared at me. I smiled. I moved on. Her mother was watching from across the room and looked satisfied. She hadn't noticed the shoulder angle or the body language. She'd seen what she wanted to see. Her husband had seen something different. He was sitting in an armchair in the corner of the room with a bourbon, wearing the expression of a man who had learned long ago how to be invisible at his wife's events. He'd been there when I arrived. He'd watched me carry crates and arrange centerpieces, and he'd said nothing at all. But now he was watching his wife's nephew try to work his way back into the conversation near the fireplace, and his face had gone very quiet and very still. He looked at me. I looked at him. He raised his bourbon glass slightly, the smallest possible acknowledgement, and looked away. I still don't fully understand what he knew at that point. Maybe nothing, maybe more than I realized. But I think he'd been watching his wife's events for a very long time, and he'd gotten exceptionally good at reading the shape of things before they happened. Dinner was called at 7. I was refilling a water pitcher near the kitchen entrance when her mother passed me in the hallway. She stopped. "The roses were still too high at table 3, she said. "I adjusted them myself." She looked at me the way you look at something mildly disappointing that you still have to manage. "Where is your supervisor? I want to know who booked this crew." "I'll pass that along," I said. She made a sound of dismissal and walked past me into the dining room. I set down the pitcher, took a long breath, and followed her in. 40 minutes into dinner, she rose from her chair and tapped her glass with a spoon. "Before we begin the formal toasts," she said, with the practiced ease of someone who had been the most important person in every room for 30 years, "I'd like to say a few words about the young man who's about to join our family." The room went quiet. My son was sitting 4 seats from her. His fiancée had reached over and taken his hand under the table, though she was smiling up at her mother with the particular smile of someone who is hoping very hard that they're wrong about what's about to happen. "A marriage," her mother began, "is about more than love. It's about—" I dropped the tray. It hit the marble floor with the loudest sound I'd produced all evening. Every head in the room turned. Her mother stopped mid-sentence. My son looked toward the sound, which meant he looked at me for the first time that evening, and I watched the expression on his face move from surprise to recognition, to something I can only describe as working very hard not to laugh. Her mother's face went the opposite direction. She crossed the room in 6 steps, grabbed my arm, and said, loud enough for the 10 nearest people to hear clearly, "People like you simply cannot be trusted with anything that matters. You have been a disaster this entire evening, and I want you out of this building right now." The room was very quiet. "Beverly." Her husband's voice came from the head of the table, not loud, just present. "I'm handling it, Roger." "Beverly," he said again, "just the name, nothing else." And then my son stood up. "Dad," he said clearly across the room, "are you okay?" I watched her hand drop from my arm, like it had just realized what it was holding. I watched her turn slowly to look at my son, then back at me, then at the staff lanyard clipped to my flannel shirt, then at my face, really look at it for the first time. "I'm fine," I said. "I was just heading to get changed. I've been meaning to do that for about an hour." I unclipped the lanyard and set it on the nearest table. The silence that followed was the longest silence I'd experienced since my wife's funeral. Her husband started laughing. It started as a quiet sound from the head of the table, the kind you might mistake for a cough, and then it became unmistakably laughter. Real laughter, helpless laughter, the kind that has been waiting a very long time to get out. He stood up, still laughing, and said, "I'm sorry. I'm very sorry, everyone. It's just, Beverly, you've been giving our son-in-law's father tasks for the past hour." I didn't know. I know you didn't know. He wasn't laughing anymore, but he wasn't unkind either, just tired in the way a person sounds when they've been carrying something heavy for decades and have finally decided to set it down. "That's the problem, Beverly. You never know. You never actually look." Her nephew was staring at his bread plate. My son's fiancée had both hands over her mouth. 2 of her college friends at the far end of the table appeared to be recording on their phones. Her husband turned to the room. "While I have everyone's attention," he said, "and before my wife continues her toast, I want to say something about this young man." 3 months ago, Beverly hired someone to look into his background. She found a failed business from when he was 26 and $40,000 in debt. He paused to let it settle. What she didn't mention, or perhaps didn't find, is that he paid every dollar of it back within 2 years, on his own, No bankruptcy protection, no help from family. Just work. He looked at my son directly. I found that out on my own. It made me respect you more than almost anything else I've learned about you. My son was very still. I also found out about the bakery, her husband continued. The wrong delivery address that was called in last week. I called them myself on Tuesday and corrected it. Your cake will be exactly where it's supposed to be tomorrow morning. Her mother was standing in the middle of the dining room, looking like a woman who has just watched the ground rearrange itself beneath her feet. And you? He looked at his nephew without warmth. Your mother is my wife's sister, and I love her. But you are going to sit down, stop talking to my daughter, and go home after dinner. Am I understood? The nephew sat down. From the far end of the table, a small, bright-eyed old woman, her husband's mother, 91 years old if she was a day, set down her fork and said, in a voice like a bell in a very quiet church, Roger, I have been waiting 40 years to watch you do that. I was beginning to think I'd have to do it myself. The room exhaled, someone laughed, then someone else, and then it was real laughter, the kind that fills a room up instead of hollowing it out. Her mother sat down. She did not speak again that evening. She did not finish her toast. I went to my car, put on my suit, came back in, and sat down next to my son. He looked at me for a long moment and then shook his head slowly. You carried boxes for 45 minutes, he said. They needed carrying. Dad. The centerpieces were crooked. He put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed it once, and that was the end of it. The wedding the next morning was simple and bright and exactly what they'd wanted. No drama, no disasters, no unwanted surprises. The cake arrived at 9:15, right on schedule. Her father walked his daughter down the aisle and shook my hand at the altar. A real handshake, the kind where you feel the grip, and said quietly, Good man. Good son you raised. I thought about my wife then and didn't trust myself to say much, so I just nodded and said, You too. Her mother came to the wedding. She sat in the third row on her family's side and was quiet and still and appropriate in every way, which is all anyone asked of her. I noticed she did not look at me during the ceremony. I also noticed that her husband's mother had been placed in the seat directly beside her, presumably as a precaution, and appeared to be providing a low, cheerful running commentary directly into her ear throughout the entire service. Her nephew was not there. At the reception, her husband found me at the bar, and we ended up talking for 2 hours. Turns out he'd been Navy before the technology money, grew up in Georgia, put himself through school on a scholarship. We have considerably more in common than either of us would have guessed. And we've had dinner 3 times since. His wife has been in therapy since February, working through what he describes as 40 years of behavior that was easier to overlook than to confront. I don't know what the future holds for her. I only know what I've seen, which is a woman who is very slowly, very carefully, learning to look at the people in front of her before deciding what they are. 6 months after the wedding, she called me. Not my son, not his wife, me. She called on a Wednesday afternoon, and when I answered, she said, This is Beverly. I want to apologize for the things I said at the rehearsal dinner and for the things I did that you may not know the full extent of yet. A pause. There's more. Roger has the details when you're ready. I was quiet for a moment. I appreciate you calling, I said. Another pause. Longer. Then, Your son is a good man. I can see that clearly now. I'm sorry it took me as long as it did to look. She came to my son and his wife's housewarming in April, brought a pie, apple, from scratch, slightly lopsided on one side where it had shifted in the car. My daughter-in-law put it in the center of the kitchen table and cut it first, before anything else, and when she handed her mother a slice, her mother said, Thank you. Just those 2 words, quietly and plainly, without any performance around them. But she meant them. You could tell. I sat on the back porch with her husband that afternoon while the party carried on inside. We watched the neighborhood and drank cold coffee, and eventually he said, She's trying. It's slow, but it's real. I can see that, I said. Took me calling her out in front of 35 people at a rehearsal dinner to get her started. He shook his head. I should have done it 20 years ago. I thought about that. About how long it sometimes takes for a person to say the thing that needs saying, in front of the people who need to hear it. About how one moment, embarrassing, irreversible, captured on 3 different phones and sent to people neither of us has ever met, can move a story from wherever it's been stuck to somewhere entirely new. She called me people like you, I said, in a room full of witnesses. He winced. She was talking to the wrong man, I said, but she ended up saying it to the right audience at exactly the right time. I turned my coffee cup in my hands, so I suppose it wasn't the worst thing that ever happened at a rehearsal dinner. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know, I knew who you were the minute you walked in that evening." I looked at him. "I'd seen your photo. My daughter showed me months ago. I watched you carry those crates for the first 10 minutes, and I thought." He paused, and there was something in his expression that was half guilt and half amusement. I thought, let's see where this goes. I stared at him. "You could have said something," I said. "I could have," he agreed pleasantly. I shook my head. He laughed, the same laugh I'd heard at the rehearsal dinner, quiet and long overdue. And we sat there on that porch in the late afternoon, 2 old men who'd each learned in our different ways that sometimes the wisest thing you can do is stay patient and still and watchful and let the truth find its own way into the room.